Hi there, Shaina Bilow here. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to sew buttons onto your knitted sweaters. In this case for the sweater, I have these really nice lightweight buttons with a shank on them. This little piece in the back where I'll be inserting my thread and needle. Occasionally, you'll have buttons like this that have holes on the front. Those are great too. In this video, I'm not showing you how to do that, but maybe another one. I also wanted to mention that if you're using a very heavy button, this one is a shank button here, or if your whole button, like a button like this, is very, very heavy or large, I recommend using a backer button behind it. So this is a button that either matches your fabric or it won't be really seen. You can get them in all different types of sizes. I like to use clear ones, but essentially what you would do is when you sew that thick, heavy button onto the one side of the fabric, the backer button goes on the back. It creates sort of a sandwich with your fabric here, and that helps keep this sturdy and make sure that your knit doesn't stretch out of shape. Okay, let's begin. Typically, or often, I use my knitting yarn to sew buttons on if it's strong enough. Here I'm using thread. The reason I'm using thread is because I've been noticing that my knitting yarn is stretching out a little bit. When I sew a button on with it, it kind of grows over time and then the button gets a little floppy. So I'm going to use thread this time. Also, I sometimes use my knitting yarn when I have buttons like this with the holes in them, because then you get to see that knitting yarn coming through holding the button on, which I think looks nice. So you can make a choice there. There are no wrong answers. All right, so here we go. What I love to do is sew buttons onto striped knits or knits that have cables or some repetition of something, because I find my hole on one side and then I locate in that same stripe or at the same cable repetition where the button should go. It's right in the middle here. This hole is right at the bridge of my stripe right here. So the button would go adjacent or just across the way from that. Right here, I'm just a little bit below in this green section, so this button would be sewn here and so forth. So when you use your fabric as a guide for sewing on buttons, you ensure that your sweater will not come out crisscrossy and a little strange looking. I've seen sometimes buttons that have gone on and then the pattern looks like this. The fabric's a little off. So use your stripes, or if you have cable crossings or anything, any indicator on your fabric that can help you, use that to help you place your buttons. All right, so now to sew on the button. I have this button here, and again, I'm not using a backer button because this is pretty lightweight. It already has a shank, and I'm going to be sewing this 3 ribs up, so just below where these stripes meet here. So I'm going right here. I'm putting my button in the center. So I'm taking my needle, and you want to make sure that your needle will go through the hole of your button, of course. I like to use needlepoint needles because they're blunt and I always seem to stab myself. So needlepoint needles work very well for this. I have my thread doubled over, and from the back of the fabric towards the front, I'm going to insert my needle up into the button band fabric. Then I'm going to go through the hole in the shank, and then my thread came out right here. I'm going to go just a little bit to the side of that and pull the button into place. Now, I keep going, so I'm going to come up from the back of the fabric, making sure not to go up through the same hole that my needle just came down in, or I'm going to be unraveling, and then through the hole in the shank, then down in the fabric to the side. And I'm going to keep repeating that. With the thread, it's a little tricky to repeat it until the shank is full, but until I feel like I've gotten a couple passes and the button is on there securely. That's the plan. So the shank doesn't have to be full of thread, but it'll be pretty close. Certainly if your needle stops passing through the hole, the buttonholes, you don't need to keep going. But here I've got a few more passes. So I think this is pretty good. This feels secure to me. So I'm going to pass my thread to the back. After that last go through, I'm going to turn the fabric around. My needle is off. And I'm going to do an overhand knot here, and then another overhand knot. And then if you like, you can weave in this tail a little bit or just snip it. I'm going to do another knot just to be extra wild, extra conscientious. If I were using knitting yarn for seaming the button on here, I would then weave in the tail a little bit. But here with the thread, the knots do hold pretty well. And that would be how to sew on a shanked button. And since it has the shank on it, there's a little distance between the button and the sweater, and that fills up with the fabric of your other side. Happy knitting!